right, we are live from Nashville, and the annual MAPS meeting it's actually ongoing as we speak. There was a great session yesterday for field medical and everything around field medical organizations, MSLs. Today, we actually had the first day with the general session for medical affairs. So we are here today to give you some of the highlights. We are not going to be able, obviously, to cover everything that happened yesterday and today, but we are trying to give you some of the highlights of what's been discussed here in Nashville at the MAPS meeting. And as usual, I'm joined by my co-host, Marika.
Thank you, Luca. Welcome, everybody. It's a lot of fun to be here in Nashville. It's a little strange to sit right next to you, but as we're presenting, but we'll have fun anyways. And I'm very excited to have Patrina.
Yeah. Hello. Did you guys notice how they talked to each other like I wasn't even here? Welcome. I'm Patrina Pellet. I run a blog on medical affairs called medicalaffairsvalue.com. It's been really awesome attending the Nashville sessions. It's extremely full. There are so many people here, and the energy has been really great.
Awesome. So why don't we start from yesterday, because we didn't cover yesterday's session yet, but obviously there were quite a few extremely interesting sessions. And actually, the first one I would love, and I'm looking at my little notes here. So, so the first one I'd love to cover was the session on standing up for science, and I know both of you were there. Marika, what's your take on that session?
That's those were your own notes, right?
Kind of.
That's yeah. So I absolutely loved the session from Brian Dunn. He first gave a keynote session and later a workshop. Both were well attended and was very fascinating to watch. Basically, what he was talking about is the fuzzy trace theory by Dr. Reina from Cornell University, which talks about how misinformation takes root within within people. So when we are educating about vaccines and autism, how people continue to believe that despite that there's true evidence. And so how we are processing information is that we get the verbatim part where we really get the data and the technology, but that's not necessarily what we keep and retain as in our memories. We take what they call the gist of it, and the gist is not just the data, but it's also our the knowledge we had previously, our value, our system, and the emotion that we are attaching to it at that particular moment. So when things are not particularly aligned, so for instance, if somebody says the ice cap is melting, from previous information, they can say or think and repeat like, hey, the ice cap is melting because of global warming. So that's how we connect the dots, so to speak. We keep the gist, we keep that and store that differently, and we retrieve that differently than when we have things verbatim. So that was really the down low on that. Any thoughts?
Yeah, and interestingly, if we think deeply about this, there's a lot of implications for the work that we do in medical affairs and how we engage with HCPs. And so we need to think about not only their value system, but their base knowledge level in terms of when we're educating them and what type of information that they retain.
Right.
And what in particular for people in the field and MSLs, what do you think is the potential action they can take on Monday morning when they get back in the field? What's
I know.
Yeah.
So I would definitely recommend, after going to that session, that folks engaging with HCPs spend the time to really get to know their HCPs and try to understand their value systems. So their value systems are going to influence what they remember and what you're educating them on and the actions that they will actually take. So I think this is a really good way for you to start educating your HCPs more deeply on your science and your data and getting them to take the actions that will help create better outcomes for patients.
Awesome. So moving now to another session. So today there was a very interesting session actually on digital excellence when it comes to product launches. And obviously that's very trending topics these days. Everyone is trying to figure out how we can fully leverage digital capabilities and omni-channel engagement within medical affairs. So Patrina, you were there. What's your take?
Yeah, so this was a really interesting session trying to get us to think more innovatively and more broadly about how we use digital to achieve launch excellence. So we had our speakers and moderators give us a download on different ways that we could start thinking about how we leverage digital in launch. And then we went into breakout sessions and we were each given a different scenario that we had to create a digital launch for. And so we were asked to really think about digital innovation. In my table, it was really fun. We started thinking about, okay, we need to know the patient journey. We need to know all the touch points. We need a data lake to pull these things all together. And then we need to think about where are our patients, what are their channels, and then also applying this to the HCP, and then really understanding those touch points, and then leveraging digital techniques to get real-time data back on how these touch points and engagement are working, and then use this to reiterate and see how well we're doing. And then everybody had really cutesy names for their teams. We were the data and decision science team, and there was a zebra team, I think, as well. So it was really cool to hear how everybody was thinking of these really unique ways to start to leverage digital in the launch space.
Right. And I guess the buzzword these days is omnichannel, right? So we are all saying that we should be striving for an omnichannel communication within medical affairs, omnichannel education, omnichannel engagement. Was that also part of the discussion?
It was secretly about omnichannel. I think it wasn't called that, but it was definitely getting us to think a lot about how we now have all these different channels that we have to engage with our stakeholders during launch, and how are we going to pull them all together.
So I have a question for both of you, because Luca, you like the digital so much and new shiny things.
I don't know if it's true, but
but we have a lot of new digital techniques, coming in place. But also thinking back about what Brian Dunn said yesterday and what we just talked about. How do you individualize towards your stakeholders with their values and how they're perceiving it, and how can you possibly use our newer artificial intelligence?
Oh wow, that's a lot of things in one question.
We gotta ask
All right.
Chat GPT right now. Stay tuned.
All right, so maybe I'll give it a shot, and
Yeah,
I'd love
yeah.
to hear your thoughts.
You'll need to repeat that. There was such a
That
many
was a
questions.
lot of
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah. So
Let's rewind.
I think when it comes to the meeting customers where they are, which is the whole principle behind omnichannel, I need to say personally, I had I would say almost like a honeymoon for several months with omnichannel.
Long honeymoon.
Not yeah.
Not for the struggle phase.
Yeah, right.
They're going through annulment.
So I need to say I did try my very best, and I literally pushed my team to explore omni-channel ways of engaging with KOLs. At some point I came to the realization that omni-channel, if we think of omni-channel like what Amazon does, right? So that seamless experience across web, social, email, physical, it's really hard. It's really hard to replicate in medical affairs. It's a highly regulated environment. We cannot do many of the things that Amazon or consumer in general does. And it's very hard to hit every single channel. And it's just very challenging, right? So that's when I personally made a transition from trying to be everywhere at all times to having a selected number of channels, like a few channels that we believe are making the biggest impact, where we have the vast majority of our HCPs and stakeholders, and really focus on those, right? Trying to have good presence across the 4 or 5 channels. That's why I moved from what I call omni-channel to what I call right channels, right? So trying to really identify, first of all, and then address and master those few channels instead of, again, trying to be everywhere. What do you think, Katrina?
Well, I think omni-channel doesn't necessarily mean all channels, right? And that's where having a good patient journey and HCP journey comes in.
Right.
So you understand where they really are. And then omni-channel, as you mentioned, is really about the seamless experience. And I think within medical affairs, we have a lot of opportunities. Obviously, we won't be an Amazon or a Netflix, but if we start thinking more deeply about the data that we do have, and then how we can use that to help support our interactions to create a more seamless experience, I think there's a huge opportunity there. So, for example, having visibility into all the touch points that your company has with an HCP. So if you think about those terrible experiences you have with AT&T or with a phone company where you get passed on to another person and another person and another person, and you have to explain your problem over and over again, we have lots of opportunities in medical affairs to avoid that just by looking at prior data or how the HCP has been interacting. And I think something that we'll see more of coming in the future is looking at what, you guys don't boo me off the stage here, I'm going to say this, but more marketing type metrics, right? We should be understanding where is the HCP, is my HCP coming to the website? Which content is she looking at? Is she engaging with MedInfo? Is she talking with the chat bot? What topics is she talking about? And then the MSL, when he or she has this information, can use it to inform their next engagement. So I think I heard someone call it, especially in the medical affairs space, how to use channels to support the next interaction. So it's about knowing your customer and then how they want to learn. So and now I'm rambling, I'm going to be quiet.
Right. It's all back integrated. Are you reaching in the right way?
Yeah.
And I think one more point is that something that sometimes we underappreciate is how omni-channel we can be when you think beyond medical affairs only, right? So there are certain things that, like banner ads, we're never going to be able to do banner ads in medical affairs. It's just not a thing. But commercial does, right? Marketing, that's one of the channels they have. So we can potentially get to a point that we are really going to be multi-channel or omni-channel, but cross-functionally, right? So we have the opportunity within medical to hit channel A, B, C, and on the commercial side, they have the opportunity to hit channels 1, 2, 3, but jointly, right? If you look at the bigger picture, we are very close probably to being omni-channel. So again, cross-functional omni-channel, if I'm making sense.
But that requires a greater collaboration that we need to develop.
I think a really simple example of how we could create omni-channel is think about MSL face-to-face interaction and commercial face-to-face interaction, having information on what's happened there, not necessarily knowing everything that's happened in the conversation, but even there is a huge opportunity to make an omni-channel seamless experience for HCPs, because we've all heard those stories where MSLs and sales reps are visiting the same HCP even on the same day, right? And imagine how that feels from the HCP's perspective. So maybe we're overcomplicating it a little bit too.
I love that. I love that. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
let's get to the next topic.
Yeah.
That's about the session with the future of 2030. What's a medical affairs going to look like? Both of you were there. I wasn't, so the floor is yours.
Yeah.
Don't fight.
We might fight.
I clearly realize that's a very polarizing topic. So when I think of, just to give a little download on the different aspects that were touched during the session, some of the elements that were discussed were where some capabilities or functions truly belong. Things like HEOR or real world evidence. Is that supposed to be part of medical affairs? Is it such a specific and unique expertise that requires a center of excellence that is outside of medical affairs. Same with other functions like working with patients and patient advocates. Is that a separate kind of standalone function, or is that part of medical affairs? And one last piece was around other stakeholders in the healthcare ecosystem, including payers, for decision makers in general when it comes to formularies, pathways. So that's probably the other one function that obviously requires a lot of know-how, a lot of expertise. And the discussion was, is that really core and part of medical affairs? Does that belong to medical affairs, or it can potentially be a standalone function? So what's your take?
Well, I think along the lines of this conversation, where should these functions sit? Should it be owned by medical affairs? Pete Polero said it very well, that it doesn't necessarily need to be owned by medical affairs, but it is a responsibility of medical affairs to make sure that the scientific aspect of these functions are taken care of. So there were some great discussions around health literacy and how medical affairs should be providing education, not necessarily directly to patients, on helping patients make healthcare-based decisions. So I thought that was an interesting perspective for me. I think we hear that a lot, where it's like, oh, medical affairs has to own this or that, but that's probably not going to happen most of the time. And maybe we should be thinking more about how can we collaborate better with these other functions, whether they sit in medical affairs or outside of medical affairs, to help create better outcomes.
Right. And I think, if I may steal your thunder a little bit, something that has been clearly happening for the last probably 2 decades is that within medical affairs, what we have been seeing is an expansion of the stakeholders. We are healthcare stakeholders we are engaging with. Years ago, when I started in medical affairs, it was mostly HCPs, right? It was mostly, well, actually, probably at the very beginning, it was really prescribers, right? That used to be the kind of key stakeholder for medical organizations. And then slowly but surely, we expanded that pool of stakeholders to all HCPs, and then payers and patient, some of the different stakeholders we just described. So what I can see moving forward, and definitely moving towards 2030, that was the title of the session, is continuing expansion in terms of hitting more and more decision makers across the healthcare ecosystem that do benefit from having that deep scientific conversation with a medical affairs or MSL, a medical affairs person, as opposed to a commercial colleague. What do you guys think?
I definitely agree. We're seeing more and more MSLs not only have to engage with different types of HCPs, right? So we're moving to multi-care or multidisciplinary care teams, right? So it's not just the doctor, but who is the nurse or the PA that's helping in this care of the patient, or geneticists, for example. Right. So we have broader stakeholder group, and this even was exacerbated with COVID, where now all of a sudden you might have had to talk to infectious disease doctors as well, and some TAs you would never talk to infectious disease doctors.
Right.
And now, to Luca's point, now we're seeing other medical affairs getting involved with other decision makers. So it's very important, especially as physicians move out of private practice and into big health systems, that we know who are the formulary decision makers, right? Because physicians most of the time will not prescribe something that is not on the formulary. Right. So we are seeing medical affairs teams more and more having these direct conversations with payers, showing the science, talking about the value. And I think we're going to see that expand even more. Marika, what are your thoughts?
That's I have no thoughts on that.
But I do have a question actually for both of you, because everything you are saying makes total sense, and I would love to see medical affairs again expanding responsibilities and engaging with even more stakeholders and adding value to even more stakeholders. I guess the other side of the coin, though, is what skills and capabilities we need within medical affairs? And do we have all we need at this point in time? Do we think that our MSLs, medical directors, scientific communication, medical information, do we think that our medical affairs professionals today have the skill set and the capabilities required for that broader spectrum of responsibilities that we just described? Is that the case, or should we work on it?
See, now that I have a lot more to say about about that. I think we are not entirely aligned across the industry about what skill sets, what capabilities we need to have to succeed. And so we're going to talk about that tomorrow. But once we align and once we have clearer definitions of what it really is that we do, we can represent it better to a broader, within the company, and address our value and see how we add things. Now, we are all scientifically trained and we're very good at that. But that doesn't mean that we don't have areas of opportunities in other areas, especially, emotional intelligence, business acumen. That's not what we're trained in. So over time, I think that those capabilities are becoming more and more important to understand, what is your HCP journey, as you said previously, what's your patient journey, where are people going, and see that in a broader context. So yes, I think we have a lot to do in that area.
I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to ask you a tough one. So I've been hearing about this business acumen. Oh, medical needs more business acumen, right? That's something that we hear all the time. What does that mean?
I have an answer.
Well, there you go. That's why I'm asking you.
It means understanding the commercialization process and what it means to bring therapy to patients. So usually when people hear, especially people in medical affairs, hear the word commercialization, they think commercial. That's not the case. Commercial is the end user of the commercialization process. So it's about understanding every step from preclinical to post-launch sunsetting a product and what that means to get that into the hands of patients. So it's a mixture of strategic thinking, communication skills, collaboration, working with multiple sets of stakeholders. So I really think it's about understanding what it means to bring a product to patients.
But in addition, not just that macro environment, but also your micro environment.
Yes.
If you're an MSL, how do you have a strategy for your territory? What's your vision? Where do you want to get, over time? How are you making those steps? What is the journey your ACE is going to make? How do you assess where are they at that particular point, and how do you strategically move that forward? So yes, I would say in addition,
and
the microenvironment, where are you yourself? And that's for the MSL, but also for home office based.
Oh yeah, and I would definitely say understanding where you sit in the organization, right? What is your role? And I know for me, coming out of academia, it took me 2 years working in industry to even understand where I sat. So to your point, Marika, we don't have training. Most of us don't have MBAs, right? We weren't trained in business acumen. So really learning business and like what it actually means. So I think something actionable to take away would be collaborating with your cross-functional partners, understanding their role, how that fits into the commercialization process. Oh, now we got to think of a hard question for Luca.
All right, I have bad news for you guys, and I have good news. So the bad news is that we are at time. So
we have 5 more minutes.
We need to wrap this up. But the good news, though, is that we actually have 2 more days here
so we can
Nashville.
think of a question.
So you guys have plenty of time to think about nasty questions for me. But the good news, as I said, is that we have 2 full days tomorrow and Wednesday. So we're gonna try our very best to bring you the highlights, the latest and greatest from the MAPS 2023 meeting. And thank you for spending some time with us, Patrina.
Yeah, they forced me, you guys. I was like, I want to go to the session. They were like, nah.
No.
Thank you guys.
We're holding your hostage.
Yeah, that was a really fun conversation.
Right. I enjoyed. Okay, now I have to lean over.
Thank you, guys.
Bye,
thank you so much.